today's lesson is on how do we solve equations with square roots. Problem 1. What is the side length of a square with an area of 100 meters squared? Take a second to copy down the question. When we're reading this problem, we see that we are told it has an area of 100 meters squared and that we are dealing with a square. So I'm going to start by writing my area formula for a square, which is area equals side squared. Now I'm going to plug in all the information that I know. I know that the area is 100, so I have 100 equals side squared. In order to get rid of the squared, I need to do the opposite, which is taking the square root. And whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. On the right-hand side, the square root and the square cancel each other out, so I'm just left with s for the side length, which is what I'm looking for. The square root of 100 is positive or negative 10. Now, since I'm dealing with the side length of a square, I am not able to have a negative side length, so the side length of the square is 10 meters. And it's only meters. That's the only unit that we would use. The meter squared is for the area. But when I'm talking about the side length, it is just meters. So the negative 10 would not be a part of my answer because you cannot have a negative side length or a negative distance. Problem 2. We're going to look at the top part and then we'll look at the bottom half. Solve the following equation for x. X squared equals 35 and x to the third power equals 121. Take a second to copy down the question. I'm going to solve each one of these problems separately. I have x squared equals 35. The opposite of x squared, to get rid of that, is to take the square root of both sides. So my square root and my squared cancel out. And I'm left with x equals positive or negative, since we have x squared. And 35 is not a perfect square, so I can keep my answer as the square root of 35. Or, if the problem told me to round, I can say that x is about still having my positive or negative, and the square root of 35 is about positive or negative 5.92. Now the second problem, x to the third power, or x cubed, equals 121. The opposite of x cubed, or x to the third power, is taking the cube root. So I'm going to take the cube root of both sides. The cube root and the cube cancel out, and I'm just left with x equals, now 121, that is not a perfect cube, so I can leave my answer as the cube root of 121. When you're taking the cube root, it's not positive or negative, it's just whatever the sign is of the number that you're taking the cube root of. So my answer would just be positive cube root of 121, or if we round it to round it, we could say that our answer is about 4.95. Now the second part of the problem, solve the following equations for x. X squared equals negative 25, and x to the third power equals negative 125. Take a second to copy down the question. To solve this, we have to do the opposite of x squared, which is taking the square root of both sides. When I do that, the x squared and the squared root cancel out, and I'm just left with x. Here, I have the square root of negative 25. We are not able to take the square root of a negative number, so if any time you get a negative under your square root, we would say that there's no real solution. The reason why is because I have to multiply the same number by itself when I'm taking the square root. So positive 5 times positive 5 is equal to positive 25, but we needed a negative. Negative 5 times negative 5 is also equal to positive 25. Again, neither one of those options are negative, so we're not able to take the square root of a negative number. And the next problem, x to the third power equals negative 125. Again, we're going to solve this, so I need to get rid of that cubed. To do the opposite of cubed, I'm going to take the cube root of both sides. Now the cube root and the cube cancel out, so I'm just left with x equals. Now the cube root of negative 125. When you have the cube root, or when you're doing the root that's an odd number, this number can be negative. So since that number is negative, my answer is going to be negative. And the cube root of 125 is 5. So that means that x equals negative 5. And the reason why that works is because I'm multiplying negative 5 by itself 3 times. So if I were to multiply these out, negative 5 times negative 5 is a positive 25. And positive 25 times negative 5 is a negative 125. So when you're taking the cube root, you can have a negative number. When you're taking the square root, if you have a negative number, then we have no real solution.